The way I assert, just Peter Crone's opinion, is that actually these are constraints you arrived with. Born with. Because that's the identity that you're here to transcend in order to discover the ultimate human experience, which is true freedom. Not freedom that is, as I said earlier, in all arenas of life, that's the byproduct, but true freedom, which is an inner experience, the emancipation from the idea of the limited view of yourself.
An entrepreneur straight out of New York City, Michael Chernow. What's cracking?
What up, guys? Welcome back to the Creatures of Habit podcast. I am sitting across from Peter Crone. I am very, very excited to learn more about his journey and he's coined the mind architect. That to me just piqued my interest and the interest of people across the globe. He's worked with celebrities that you probably know very well, athletes, the elites, on trying to understand and optimize and sort of conquer the mind and really, really sort of lift up rocks and shake the tree and figure out ways to potentially change perspective and look at things a little bit differently in, you know, the path towards better. So I'm really, really excited to have Peter on the show. Welcome.
Michael, thank you. Good to be here.
Absolutely, man. So, I mean, we've just been sort of chopping wood a little bit before we got going.
Yeah.
The Creatures of Habit podcast is a show where I get to sit down with people that have inspired me and others, potentially thousands, potentially millions of other people, to really understand your habits, rituals, and routines. That's sort of the premise of the show. It's really just like a value-packed, like, quick punch, 1-2 punch saying, hey, these are some things that I've done over the years in specific times throughout my day to really help me stay on the beam. And ultimately, you know, I say it in the intro to the show, I'm not so concerned about winning or financial or material, although that's great. Yeah. Really what I am curious to learn about is what drives people's happiness. Yeah. And what does that mean? Right, like what is that? Yeah. And so I'd love to hear from you. You know, what a few things that you can share with us. You know, morning routine is a major part of my life. It has been for a long time. Yeah. It's getting a little poo-pooed these days. Like, oh God, just get to work, or you know, all right, we get it. You do blah 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 blah. Yeah. You know, like why? You know, and for me, it's about discipline. Discipline makes me happy. I believe that freedom is really sort of freedom is truly felt through discipline. I really do. I really feel like, you know, when you know what you got to do and you have the ability to commit and say, this is what I'm going to do and actually do it, it helps build confidence and then courage. And anyway, so that's sort of like my interpretation of this life of happy. Yeah. Love it. We definitely have a lot in common given we've only just met. But there's a few words that you just shared that sort of inspire my insights, distinctions, and quotes. I tend to download in quotes that help people to sort of transcend traditional thinking. So given you're pointing first of all to happiness, I'm kind of attached to the way that I look at that, which is I say true happiness is the absence of the search for happiness, right? So it invites this idea of I'm not trying to get somewhere other than where I am. So it really allows people to be fully content with where they are. Now, that's not to negate the idea of being committed to something as well, right? To me, I say we're masterpieces and works in progress, right? So that to me is where I find my happiness, is to not be involved in the chase or the idea that my life is somewhere in the future in this idealized one day fictitious illusion or dream life, because you're never there, right? So that's chasing the horizon. The other word you used is freedom, which I would assert is my main product. I mean, the back of my cloak says I am freedom. So that's what I assert is what I'm bringing. That's my calling, my purpose is to help people discover freedom in all arenas of their life. And that could be financial freedom, that could be spiritual freedom, that could be psychological or emotional freedom, whatever it might be, freedom in your relationships and the way that you get to express yourself. And then the last word, discipline, I think is something that, having worked with thousands of professional athletes, is the common thread, discipline. More so than commitment, because I think people make a lot of commitments, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have discipline. Whereas discipline is, I would say, the embodiment of a commitment.
And the irony with discipline is that when I ask people, when do you most need discipline? And, people give a myriad of different responses, but I say, when you most need discipline when you don't have it, right? So, so they're the things that sort of stood out. I don't know if you want me to go through my routine or my morning routine, as that was sort of one of the things you brought up.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear it and as detailed as you can get.
Okay. So I guess I could, as a crass example, look at the half flush and the full flush.
Totally.
So that the consistent half flush is in the morning, I typically get up pretty early. I'm an early bird. I sort of live more this sort of yogi kind of life. So I'm an early to bed, early to rise. I often joke with my friends, I'm a 9-to-5er, not work, but sleep. And so typically around 5 is when I'll get up. First thing I usually do, and hopefully everybody does, is, discard the wastes from the body, have a solid bowel movement. Part of my studies is in Ayurveda, sort of 5,000-6,000 year old traditional way of healing through in that yogic world is sort of under the auspices of Hinduism, but looks at the elements, somebody's constitution. So we recognize that one of the predominant ways to maintain health is that you have to have the 3 waste channels working, which is sweat, urine, and feces. So hopefully get rid of some waste from the previous day. My body did its processing overnight. Then I'll do a tongue scraping to remove what's called AMA, accumulation of, again, undigested toxins. So if you look at your tongue first thing in the morning, most people, especially this day and age with so much processed food, so many distractions, people are eating on the run, they don't chew their food properly. They will find that they'll have a coating on their tongue first thing in the morning, sort of a white goo. And that can, get stuck in the fine channels of the body. I mean, at the extremes, it leads to constipation. It can be part of the brain fog. It basically interrupts the natural flow of prana and vitality through the system. So anything that you can do to eliminate that. So tongue scraping.
So how do you do it?
You just have a metal kind of U shape. You can get copper, metal, the various forms, but you basically just put that in the back of your tongue out, and scrape out whatever's on the surface of the tongue.
And do they make actual tongue scrapers?
Oh yeah, very commonplace these days. I mean, Amazon to whatever, your local yoga studio will probably carry them.
This is the 120 something episode of Creatures of Habit. And I've talked to 120 something people about their morning routine, and not a single person has mentioned tongue scraping.
Let's go.
I love it. I get so excited when somebody brings something new to the table, because it also gives me, I'm so curious, and I'm going to be scraping my tongue at least for 2 to 3 weeks to see if it makes a difference for me.
Okay. Yeah. And it's an ongoing process, and it's so subtle. These things that I tend to do aren't, big needle movers. They're just more consistent, back to that discipline. So like I have a hyperbaric chamber at home, not necessarily part of my morning routine, but it's part of my overall routine. But often hyperbaric chambers are used in clinical settings, right? In a hospital where someone's really dealing with something. I don't necessarily feel the benefits, because these are the minutiae of how I'm maintaining my commitment to health optimization, right? I'm not necessarily dealing. So same with tongue scraping. I don't know if you would feel anything. Your wife might appreciate it, next time you make out. But but it can lead to some of the halitosis and some of the other oral lack of hygiene that people have, dental stuff. So combined with that, then I do oil pulling. So you can use a myriad of different oils. I tend to use just coconut oil. Take a big tablespoon. You just swish it around for anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. I just, I go downstairs and I start just doing whatever in terms of I'll prepare a drink, but I'll just be swishing the coconut oil. So again, that's great for oral hygiene, sort of creating like that healthy biome in your mouth. Great for gum health, teeth, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another Ayurveda practice. And then you just spit it out. Then I typically do some rehydration. So obviously overnight we've been fasting. We tend to be a little bit dry. And so it varies. Right now I'm making a hot drink. Hot is usually better. based on the temperature of our body. It also helps to eliminate if some people are struggling, if they don't have good bowel movements or they're not consistent. The heat will allow things to move through. It's just sort of like, imagine you cook a lasagna or something, and when you want to wash the dish, if it's been in the oven for a while, it can be kind of baked on the sides. You tend to leave it to soak in hot, soapy water. So drinking hot water, I typically right now I'm doing fresh lemon juice or lime juice with maybe a bit of shilajit, some turmeric, a little bit of maple syrup, and a pinch of Celtic salt. So it's sort of my own nature's Gatorade a little bit, just to help rehydrate, but also to flush through anything that might be sitting in the digestive tract.
Shilajit's having a bit of a moment right now.
It's been around for a minute. It's kind of popular, but maybe it's having a resurgence. I don't know. So that's great for all sorts of minerals and stuff. Then I'll move into some form of movement. That one I'm sure you've heard in the 120 plus guests. That's not going to be that unique. So that will involve anything from high intensity interval training, HIIT, to Pilates, to just traditional cardio or weight training, depending. I also love my tennis. So like yesterday morning, I played tennis for 2 hours. So anything to help the body get acclimatized to the new day and to move and keep all the joints well greased. And then I will do some contrast therapy typically, which is sauna, depending on how cold it's out. I do a cold plunge, or just take just sit under the hose, which is typically cold. And then shower, get ready for my day. By then, if on my schedule, it's only still about 7:30. So I feel like I've got a good start on the day. If I were to go to the full, the 5-star Regal start, it would also include at the end something called Abhyanga, which is a traditional oil massage. So you do dry brushing first to, again, get rid of any dry old skin cells. And then you use medicated herb-infused oils. So depending on your constitution, if someone's more air, fire, or earth, you're going to have a different kind of recipe of herbs that gets mixed into typically a sesame oil-based. I use coconut oil again because I'm more fire. You're going to be more fire. So coconut is cooling. Sesame tends to be heating. So people who are more air or earth, they'll use sesame. And that's, for the lady listeners that you have, is arguably the greatest beauty secret for skin. Way better than any of the creme de la mer's, $200 for an ounce of whatever shit you're putting on your skin. So it's all natural, organic, as again, herbs that are pertinent to your constitution. Ideally, you leave it on your skin for 20, 30 minutes, then take a hot shower. And so the skin pores open in the presence of the heat, allows for some of that moisture to be absorbed. And you've got luscious, lustrous skin.
So, and so you said I'm fire, you're probably fire. How did you know that I was fire?
So the elements have their particular characteristics that I'm, after 20 something years, able to spot pretty readily. So an air person, so they mimic the elements, right? So it's an intuitive science. It's not something you necessarily have to remember. When you understand that wind, if you think of air like the wind, right? It's very light, it's very mobile, it's drying and it's cooling. So these are the qualities that person feels. So they light frame. They tend to be very restless people. They have dry skin, cracking joints, and they tend to feel the cold all the time. Whereas someone like you, the fire is sort of, as the elements go, a little bit more in the middle. So in traditional terminology, it's more mesomorph. You've got ectomorph and endomorph in sort of typical biology of people's stature and constitution.
Body type, yeah.
Yeah, so you're more in the middle, athletic type, good build, not too skinny, not too heavy. Your intensity of like how present you are, the fact that you're doing something like this, a podcast, your intelligence, your wit, your articulation, skin tone, a little bit of freckling, a little bit of ruddiness to your skin, stuff like this shows me, based on also knowing a little bit about your history, entrepreneurial, sort of a leader type. These are fire types.
That's fire.
Yeah, that's fire. That's fire, baby. And then an air type is going to be more lean. They're going to be the creatives, the dancers, the poets, the musicians. You think of Mick Jagger, Kate Moss, kind of basically skinny in lay terms. They tend to be hard to keep still. Like, ask what's called Vata, V-A-T-A, Vata person to do a meditation, you're probably going to struggle. They'll be like, what am I doing? I'm wasting my time. I've got a million things to do. Everything's quick. So they're in a relationship, out of a relationship. They understand everything immediately, but then they forget it typically straight away as well. So it's all about movement. Fire people, their predominant slogan would be transformation. So fire people make change. Whereas the air types tend to be creative. They're innovators. They'll have the ideas, but they have very poor follow through. And then our earthy types are like the Oprahs, and they tend to have the bigger builds, endomorph. So big hair, big eyes, big boobs, big joints, big bodies, so they tend to have accumulative disorders. If our air types have any kind of disorders, they tend to be degenerative. So Parkinson's, Alzheimer's over time, arthritis, they tend to have the cold and dry. So, they can have some skin irritations, twitches, constipation, things like that. Whereas fire types, it's all inflammatory stuff, a lot of gut stuff, IBS, Crohn's, celiac, skin issues, liver, eyes. Fire types tend to lose their eyesight a little earlier, too much heat.
Nailed it.
And then our endomorphs, they have the accumulative disorders, right? Because they're building. So it's obesity, diabetes. They hold on to things too long. They stay in relationships too long. Whereas the air people, they meet someone, they're in love, and then they're out. It's like, so you start to see the play of the elements, which is kind of fascinating. Yeah.
Wow, that is fascinating, man.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And you've studied this, so you can
years,
like see somebody, have a conversation, maybe some color on them, maybe not, and sort of ultimately determine what they are.
Yeah, in terms of a constitution, and then that will help them with diet, lifestyle, and predominantly some of their mindset tendencies, right? So Vata people, air, tend more towards anxiety, right? Because there's a lot of movement. They tend to worry. They think about the future. They're too quick. They're often running. Fire types tend to be more in the arena of like stress because they put a lot of pressure on themselves because they tend towards perfectionism. So they tend to be judgmental. Living with a fire person can be, can at times be a little bit difficult because they see everything, right? You bring light to something. So fire types are very visually dominant. The air types tend to be more sound dominant. So they're very affected by sound. And as I said, they're future-based, so they're anxiety-ridden. The earth types, because of the heaviness, they tend to be more like past attached to things. So they struggle more with depression, apathy, lethargy, stuff like that. So that gives me a good insight into what maybe some of the things they struggle with, what their relationships look like, what kind of careers they have a predisposition towards, and certainly what symptoms they might be struggling with. Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Super fascinating.
Yeah. And that's like 5% of what I love doing, right? Meaning that's a very small component. Once somebody tells me their story, now we get into the real, for me, the real meat, right? Which is what's the foundation of your identity, not your constitution, but the way that your persona has been created. Because that's what drives the show. That's also what drives habits.
What are a few things I'm so interested, because this is such a part of your life? I mean, I would imagine like essentially you're trying to help people reconstruct and or refine their lifestyle, right? Because I know, just through my life and my experience coming out of the darkness of addiction and, struggling there for a number of years and breaking through that and now sort of repurposing the conviction that I had for addiction, right? Like the dedication, the discipline. I was very disciplined about that. Being able to completely, repurpose it for positivity in my life. Yeah. And so, for someone like you who's really, you're not looking to like put a Band-Aid on someone. No. You're looking to give someone an actual lifestyle experience change, right? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like what you do is professionally, you really help people restructure their lifestyles.
As a byproduct of truly revealing the essence of who they are, right? So for me, if there's a cascade of how things come into existence, results being the sort of the end product. Well, prior to all results, there's actions and behaviors, right? Which we could put in the bucket of habits, things you do. So that's lifestyle. But prior to that, we have the thoughts and feelings that sort of are commonplace, the most consistent. Obviously, you're going to have variance within that. But the standard deviation of how you think and feel every day is what's going to determine how you behave and consequently results. But prior to that, which is where most people don't go, you go and see an expert, whether it be a psychiatrist, a spiritual teacher, a priest, or a coach of some kind. They focus on the arena of actions, right? Do this, don't do that, It's in the realm of behavior. But why that doesn't typically stick or it's short-lived is because unless you change at the core the fundamental identity that somebody is misassociated with, like the who that they are for themselves, which is what generates the thoughts and feelings, then unless somebody has a lot of willpower, you're not going to really change lifestyle for an extended period of time. So my arena of expertise is to reveal through reverse engineering what is the foundation of your identity. Who is the you that you don't even know you are that generates the thoughts and feelings, actions and results?
Is that like inner child stuff?
There's a component of that. Inner child will be, where most of these sort of structures got triggered. And that's where they started. That's the genesis of I'm not enough, I'm not loved, I'm not worthy. For somebody like yourself with the experience of addiction, partly because of your fire, right? So there's an intensity with fire people, which if misdirected can be self-abusive. If like what you're doing now can be in the arena of discipline towards more of a calling, transformative, right? So underneath that, there is going to be something that got triggered in your childhood. Dad said this, mom said that, blah, blah, blah. And then you got all the evidence you needed to turn on that part of your personality.
So I'm very interested in this. So once you're, and I would assume that you get to sort of the identity crisis or issue, the root through story, right? Through that person just sort of opening up the book.
Yeah, telling them what they're dealing with, what are their consistent patterns in life, what have their, predominant struggles been,
So now how do you architect from there?
So, if someone's willing and open, then I will start to inquire with various questions like, where did you start to have this first experience, whatever it might be, like not feeling enough, right? They're dealing with whatever it is that they don't feel their value in the marketplace is being honored. Like I'm not getting paid enough. I should be further in life. I don't have the relationship I want. Whatever it is that they're dealing on the superficial level of being human, right? Everyone's got a myriad of problems, but most of them fall into very similar buckets. So then based on what they're saying, I just have the intuitive ability to hear what must be one or two of the predominant, what I call contexts, the containers that give rise to the person who has that problem, right? What kind of being has that issue? So then I can start to lead them into, okay, well, what must that mean about you? Like, what does that feel like if you get rejected or you get fired or you're not earning the money that you feel you deserve? Like, what's that leave you feeling? And it's, I don't know, I feel like a loser, or I feel like, I'm letting down my parents, or, very, very typical responses that everyone can relate to. But then I'll go deeper. So you get to what I've called fundamentally a negation of self, which is a fancy way of saying that you've got some story, some piece of programming that's I'm not something. So if again, without getting too esoteric, I assert we're everything, right? Like whether you call that God, consciousness, the absolute, the being that we are, the soul, is timeless, boundless, limitless. There's nothing missing. But in narratives, we create limitations and constraints, usually in the form of I'm not good enough, I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, fill in the blank, right? So that's what I'm revealing. When I get to that and it resonates, and you can see usually through some sort of somatic experience, they start to cry, they get uncomfortable. Now we're close to the bone, right? Then we investigate the validity of that, right? So where did that start? Well, my brother was always successful. He got all the accolades. They gave him more attention. So for me, that meant that I don't matter as much, or I'm not as special. Okay, I can understand that, but is it an absolute truth? So then we investigate, is it a truth? It's never a truth, but it could be there for 30, 40 years, so it's convincing. And then when you've...
God, I just got to stop that first. I think that's such an important, that is such a critical thing that you just said. That nobody has ever articulated that in that way to me. You perceive it as a truth, and it probably isn't a truth, but it's very convincing.
You can get rid of the probably.
It is convincing.
But it's not a truth.
It's not a truth. It's convincing.
Yes. Yeah. So
super convincing.
It is, to the point of that this is how dysfunctional and maladaptive it can be, that because of the nature of the ego, its predominant imperative is to be right. So this is what we call self-sabotage or self-fulfilling prophecy, where despite the constraint that people have become misidentified with as truth for them, however destructive it is, they will do everything to validate it.
Put people into their lives that will validate it.
and destruct things in their life that they assert that they want, but they let go of: money, health, relationships, to be right. That's how insidious the nature of the identity is. Yeah.
So it's the story that potentially we did not create for ourselves, but somebody had put in our path at some early age, most likely, that we begin to believe and then ultimately tell over and over and over again. And that becomes ultimately our DNA.
Close. So DNA is different. That's in the physical realm.
I mean, sort of just like hypothetical DNA.
Got it. Yeah. Like, yes, persona's DNA. Yes, got it. So very close. The way I assert, just Peter Crone's opinion, is that actually these are constraints you arrived with. Born with. Because that's the identity that you're here to transcend in order to discover the ultimate human experience, which is true freedom. Not freedom that is, as I said earlier, in all arenas of life, that's the byproduct, but true freedom, which is an inner experience, the emancipation from the idea of the limited view of yourself, right? So we arrive, we orchestrate, curate the events of our life. I know this sort of can, for some people, seem a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me. So that you will create, one of my more popular quotes that people share a lot is that life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So we arrive not free. That's why we're in this shit show paradigm of planet Earth with all of the, madness that happens here, because it's the perfect dimension within which we can get triggered to reveal those limitations that we arrived with. See, if it's dad that did it, now you're powerless and you're a victim. If it's because of the breakup that happened, now it's your ex, right? So for me, we're sovereign beings and we're fully responsible for the experience of our life. That's the only way that you can empower anybody to have any sort of domain over what they're creating.
So how do you reconstruct this identity?
So my catchphrase is, I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. So rather than reconstruct, it's more of a demolition process.
You deconstruct.
Yeah. Yes, it's the dissolution of the idea of oneself, which naturally gives rise to the characteristics of the essence of who you are that have always been there, just hidden by the pretense and the lies of your inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity.
So I think everybody listening to this podcast, I can identify with these I'm nots.
Yeah,
right.
I hope so. They're human.
Yeah.
They might not be so evident, but for some people, it's a smack in the face. Like, they felt not worthy for 30, 40 years. They felt not safe because of a mercurial household they grew up in where dad got drunk and screamed a lot, and now they're dealing with that where they have anxiety or, Hashimoto's because their adrenals are shot from constantly being vigilant or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Not everybody listening to this podcast is going to be able to meet you and spend time with you and work with you. Mm-hmm. If there were a couple of things that you could share.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you would call them habits, but I think if people were to implement them on a regular basis, could potentially be considered a habit and then ultimately part of their lifestyle if it's working for them.
Yeah.
Can you give us a couple of things that people can do to sort of begin to demo this this false identity that we either have arrived with or have been built over time?
Yeah, of course. And I love the word demo there because it could be a play, right? So demo, not demonstrate, because you've been doing that. But demo, demolition. So I think that one of the best ways to access, these negations that I call the limitations of the self is the very basic understanding that just notice where you get pissed off or upset. In lay terms, very common expression is like triggered. Where are people triggered? Which goes back to my quote of life will present you with people and circumstance to reveal where you're not free. So not free to me is synonymous with you're not okay with something where it's a perceived threat, right? So that's the first thing to notice. And then see what is the consistent theme. Like, how is it an arena that's a one-off, or is this like I'm always pissed off by my mom when she says this, I feel overly mothered, or I feel mollycoddled, or my dad says this and I feel judged and I'm inadequate, whatever it is, the consistent theme. Then use that as the access point to why am I not free? Like, what is the underlying thing that's bothering me? And try and find it in language with a not. Right? Meaning, what is it that you're saying at a deeper level that means that somebody's comment, someone's behavior that triggered you to feel fundamentally upset, pissed off, scared, inadequate. What is it? If you can look at it, and this is what usually requires a bit of discernment, like you got to sit quietly, maybe talk to a friend who you trust and you can be very vulnerable with. Like, what must that mean about me that I'm so pissed off that somebody, said such and such? And so that's the access to the sort of behind the wizard's curtain of like, what's the fundamental knot that you're being driven by? So once you land on that, try and find the associated experiences from childhood that happened, right? So where did you start to first feel that? And usually, because it defines us, there's going to be a myriad of examples. But there can be one or two that are predominant, or they're the sort of the peak experience of the I'm not good enough, I'm not safe, I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, whatever it might be. And then, it helps if you can feel what's it like to live in that for 20, 30, 50 years. And that's where you see the tears and the disappointment and the waste of life, the suffocation of your own vitality and aliveness. It's important to presence that, I feel, because then it puts it in your body. You're not just too heady, you feel it. And then we want to, what I say, investigate the validity of it. You ask a very simple question: is it an absolute truth that you're not good enough? And that's where it's never a truth, but it is very convincing. You've got all the evidence. Oftentimes your career, your bank account, your partner, the house you live in, the place you live is all an extension of that identity.
But is it enough to put someone in jail for?
Right. Yeah. Well, they've been living in jail, right, for 30, 40 years mentally.
Keep them in jail.
Yeah.
Is it enough to keep you in jail?
Well, that's their choice at that point. Degree, the question is, to what degree are you willing to sit in suffering versus are you committed to freedom? And so that would be the last question I'd ask people to help generate this new identity is, who could you be in the absence of that constraint? That's when the lights come on and they're like, holy shit, like, it's giving me tingles now. People like, I feel lighter, I'm breathing differently, I'd be free, I could do whatever I want. Yeah, welcome to your true nature.
This is obviously and I understand why, mind architect is what people refer to you as, because you really have figured out, or at least in your path, how to peel back the onion and help people. Like when I think of what you're doing, I literally think of like the soul kind of exposed, like coming out of, like the vision I see is kind of like the soul kind of like creeping through the chest cavity, Super
accurate, a beautiful vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my joke is I free minds and liberate souls.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know that, but that's kind of like what I have. I'm like very focused on you talking.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what was coming up for me in that.
Yeah. Beautiful. I'd say that's the only real game in town. That's why we're here. It's not to amass followers or money or get six packs and cars and beautiful partners. I mean, that's fun, and they will all be the catalyst for the fundamental calling of a human being, which is to emancipate yourself from the constraints with which you arrived.
Do you see, are there any, and I'm sure the answer is probably yes, but like, are there common characteristics of those that you have worked with and or potentially have not worked with, but have felt this sort of overwhelming sense of freedom in one's life? Are there common characteristics that you can point to that these people either do or inherently have once you feel like someone has actually have been exposed to this different way of living?
For sure. I mean, if I'm understanding the question correctly, like sort of what are the characteristics that become sort of online after the fact, once the soul has left the building? Or in this case, the incarceration facility.
The chains.
Yeah, so for sure. Why I am freedom on the back of my cloak, and why my platform is called Freedom, which is the second part to your original question of how can people do this. I do have a very affordable monthly platform where people are fully committed to this, and I share majority of my courses, like workshops, and my Free Your Mind program is all sitting in my version of a Awakening Netflix, for a nominal fee a month. So that's the other thing people can do, is because then you've got a support system. But that's the first characteristic that people display, and feel freedom. I would say then very closely thereafter is physiologically, physically as a feeling of lightness in their body, calm, relaxation. I will, if I'm sitting with someone, I will immediately notice when their physiology changes because their breathing patterns are different. You go from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which automatically shifts the chemistry of your body. A newfound sense of usually love for life, which could also go under the auspices of gratitude. Like you're not fighting what you have anymore, but you have a reverence for it. Because usually through the lens of constraint and inadequacy, we feel resistance to life. It's normalized, like it's just life, stress. But we want things to be different. We want people to behave differently. In the absence of that, you suddenly found this profound experience of harmony and real intimacy, not physical, but just energetic. Yeah, what I say, I have an intimate relationship with reality. It is what it is, and I'm not fighting it. And then for sure, a profound sense of new possibility. Right, because you've removed the constraints. So really they correlate very readily to life in terms of time, right? So freedom from the shackles of your history, you've got a newfound love and acceptance for what is, and then you get a great sense of newfound possibility for what could happen in the future. So those are the predominant qualities. That changes your vitality. It changes your ability to communicate. You listen from a different place. People are less reactive. I've had people have all sorts of disease, which is the down the line cascade of dis-ease psychologically. The absence of ease, which has been there for decades, will manifest in the tissues eventually. So those things start to, reconcile, disappear, dissolve, which is cool. But the characteristics of someone's personality is, just shit ton more joy.
So that's sort of the persona.
Yeah.
Are there things that these people tend to do physically that change as well?
For sure. Yeah, because the persona, going back to what I was saying, the cascade of how all results come about, the precursors being behaviors, prior to that, thoughts and feelings, and then prior to that, your fundamental identity, the you that you are for yourself. It's not even a belief because it's a blind spot. It's who you are until you realize it's not who you are, right? So yes, as soon as that persona shifts and that soul kind of emerges out of the constraints of these lies, then you literally are a new person, like ironically more like in tune with your actual nature. It's no longer this identity that got created over time as a survival mechanism. These are all coping strategies, right? The person who felt they weren't enough, one of the ways they survived is to work hard, be a good person, be a people pleaser and a perfectionist, right? But that's not who they are. That will attract circumstances, jobs, people to sustain that identity, which is why it's exhausting, can lead to resentment and sickness. So in the absence of that mechanism, then people tap into these natural qualities that I would assert are more soul-based. So from that place, there could be more spontaneity, there could be greater lovemaking, there could be better choices in terms of food and diet that you eat because you have a greater sense of worth, right? There isn't the same stress that you're trying to avoid through whatever means of medication, weed, alcohol, food, because it's all gone. You're just free. If you're into that kind of shit.
I just feel, I feel like there's just so much from my experience in life and the work that I've done on myself.
Yeah.
And I feel like I am honestly only scratching the surface on where, I'm going to go with the discovery.
Yeah.
But it's just so nice to hear from a true expert that I have a lot in common with the things that you say.
Great. I can see that. Yeah.
It just feels like, everybody's got to go through what they go through to get to where they're at. Yeah. And some people have a much longer, more painful journey, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And far less people along the way that they can appreciate, as opposed to potentially just like opening up their eyes a little bit. Yeah. And instead of being, like I have been going through this pretty intense breath work.
Okay, great.
And I just know that 7 out of 10 people would not have the experience that I'm having because they're just not open to it.
Yeah.
They could do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
In the exact same environment with the exact same people.
Yeah.
And just not have nearly the experience that I've been having in terms of just deep, deep work. Yeah. That has penetrated on a level like I've never experienced before. Yeah. Because they're simply just not open. And so, it's just so nice to know that you're doing this work to help people kind of see clearer.
Thank you.
You know, I think we live in a society, and we live in, I think people like you and I, we don't want to live in a bubble, right. But we kind of do live in a bubble because it's so primal to be able to tap into and connect to and be in tune with the soul.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like before all the other shit that we're exposed to today.
Yeah.
Like we were looking at the stars and thinking like, there was like, gods, that were like ruling us from the skies.
Yeah.
And that was like a real thing. Like people were just like way far more open,
Yeah. There was also a greater sense of awe, that humans had, right? And I think that's become so diluted because we're spoiled, like everything's right at the tip of your finger, with the press of a button, you've got something going to show up on your doorstep the next day. Like there's this, I feel like we've become lazy as a society, as a species, where there's this consumerism. I mean, you need only look at, you sit in an airport without judgment and you watch people, go back and forth. And like, if I was from a quote unquote different dimension, superior intelligence, and I looked at the species, I'd be like, wow, they're pretty fucked up, Like, I mean, we talk about human potential. I could argue that that's sort of the arena I play in, right? Like I sort of assert that I help people access that. But if everyone were to really, like without judgment, but just objectively look at who you are as a human being and consider like the potentiality that is available to you. And then next to that, which itself is going to be, it's going to fall short of what's actually available. But next to that, look at, how close are you to it? And pick one arena. It could just be health, right? If we were to look at the quintessential example of accessing some human potential in the physical realm, it's like Olympic athletes, right? A lot of the people I help, it's inspiring. It's exquisite, the way that their bodies function, what they can do with their bodies. That's just one arena. But, another area of potential could be your capacity to make a difference in life, which we could equate to a livelihood or income. We could look at your capacity to feel passion, love, true intimacy with the people that mean something to you, versus thinking they're all jackasses and you argue with them and you fight and you get angry. Like, we really fall short. Like, I don't think we're really average. Like, we're way below average relative to the potential of what it means to be human. And that's not a slight on us as a species. It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity. Like, I was orphaned at a young age. Mum died when I was 7 of cancer. Dad went to work when I was 17, never came back. Fatal accident. And, I look at those experiences, especially my dad, because my mum was sick for a while. So there's certain degree of anticipation or expectation. My dad was just a freak nature, one of these force majeures that you don't anticipate. And as cliche as it is, to hear, and we probably all said it in different ways, like, we just don't know how long we've got. And for me, it's like, what the fuck are you waiting for? Right? Like, there will come a day where it's literally the last time you taste a strawberry.
I have to, like, in that, and I just want to bring up a moment that I had yesterday morning that was like so relevant to what you're saying. I woke up at 4:40 in my bed. My 9-year-old son was next to me here because he crawled into bed, which he doesn't really do that much, but he crawled into bed in the middle of the night. And then my wife was on the other side of him. And I woke up and I in the morning, the first thing I do is hop into gratitude immediately. It's like the first thing I do. I smile and I go right into like, I'm grateful for my wife, for my dogs, for the kids, for the house, for the health, I just try to like beat back anxiety immediately.
Right.
And I opened up my eyes. I look over and my 9-year-old beautiful son, his face was this close to mine.
Yeah.
Just like a mouth open.
Yeah.
And I looked over at him and I was like, I could totally not take this opportunity to stare in my son's face.
Yeah.
And just look at him and just be in the moment right now.
Yeah.
Truly being intimate with my family.
Yeah.
Whether he's alive, sleeping or not. And just know that like, this is a moment that I should cherish. I literally was having this thought. This is a moment that I should absolutely cherish. And most of the time I wouldn't take the opportunity.
Yeah.
And like, that is crazy to think that like, those are the moments. Those are the moments that we totally take for granted in life.
Yeah.
It's crazy because what we think of as highlights are just such fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
In comparison to this 9-year-old kid who I love more than anything on the planet. I could feel, grab, squeeze the love. It's how potent it is for me.
Yeah.
I could totally take for granted this little boy who is just so precious in my bed with me. Who knows how many more I'm going to get of those.
Absolutely. Yeah. Beautiful.
You know?
Yeah. And so just to add a little bit of a explanation of why most people miss these divine or inspiring moments is because the programming of the ego and the identity is that this isn't it. Like, but wait, I'm getting there, right? So it creates urgency. It creates the idea that the life I want is somewhere in the future. So this is why people are desperately trying to be somewhere they're not. If you really get what I just said,
I did.
You really realize the asinine nature, without judgment, of how the brain is conditioned to predict and protect, but really ultimately to try and get to this idealized view where we think we will fundamentally be happy, which it goes back to my quote at the beginning, which is happiness is the absence of the search for happiness. Why? Because I'm completely content where I am next to my 9-year-old son.
Peter, this was such an awesome, amazing, totally, I was so just, I felt it in every cell of my body, this conversation. Really, I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah,
thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure. I can, hopefully, as they said at the end of Casablanca, Louis, this is the start of a beautiful friendship.
I believe it is. And I also think that we'll have to do more than one episode.
I would love to. I love to share, my life. I'm doing a mastermind right now, which is sort of my biggest offering, aside from my freedom platform, which is accessible to the masses. I want to make sure people can have access to the information and courses and community where people are dedicated to breaking free. But my mastermind is a 3-month container. We meet every 2 weeks. I share my philosophy. I coach, help people understand what's happening. You follow the arc of their transformation. It's so moving. But the last one I did was module 3. And at the end, completely took myself by surprise. And I was just, I sign off. I acknowledge my team for making it happen. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks for the next module. And I just said, I'm just so grateful for this community because I get my life through the fact that you're committed to finding yours. And so the fact that people want to listen, not everyone knows who the fuck I am, but usually when people hear, they're like, there's something there, right? And to know that my words and to some degree my example, the life that I live and who I be energetically, help somebody to get beyond suffering, to find some freedom. I can't think of a better way to spend my day. So I'd be happy to come on, and I hope that people got something from our conversations today. And I certainly am very grateful for who you be and the opportunity to be in your presence.
Thank you, man. Where can we find you?
Instagram, Peter Crone, just my name. Website, petercrone.com. I think they're the most common things. And yeah, there's a ton of stuff on the website. Obviously, my Instagram is flooded with content. I'm not the guy that takes pictures of my salads or in front of myself, without a top, showing abs in front of a Ferrari. Nothing wrong with people who do that. It's not really my bag. So it's usually clips from epic conversations like this. So there's usually a lot of inspiring content. But
cool.
Yeah.
Ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, shapes, and sizes, that was such a great conversation with Peter Crone. What it really does illuminate for me is this idea that the past is history and we cannot do anything to change what's happened in the past. The future is a mystery and certainly not guaranteed. There is not a single human being ever living on this planet who has actually been able to go into the future and live their life there. We live our life right here, right now. We are only guaranteed this moment. And if you don't have the awareness to do that or appreciate that, or many of us really struggle in that mission towards being present. A lot of us struggle because of stress in our lives, and we're always thinking about the future and worried about the past, and it really is a shame. And so what I've gathered from this conversation and just meeting Peter is that his real mission in life is to help people live right now, and find that freedom. Because if you're living yesterday or tomorrow, you're absolutely locked up and you're not able to experience the moment, which is ultimately what happiness is. So if you loved this podcast, I'm positive you did, do us a favor and give us a 5-star review or 5-star rating and write a nice review. And if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it. Just don't say it, just like your mom told you. But really what would mean the world to me is if you shared the podcast with a friend, a family member, someone who you think might appreciate it. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. I really do. You guys tune in every single week. Makes me so happy. Makes my job just like I get so much gratitude from this in the community. So appreciate you. Love you. Until the next one, y'all. Peace.